How strong is the case against Donald Trump? The former president has been brought up on federal charges in a historic third criminal case. He faces 3 counts of conspiracy and 1 count of obstruction for his efforts to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election, culminating in the deadly Capitol riot on January 6, 2021. Now, in the early stages of the 2024 presidential race, the former president is crying witch hunt, as he often does.
This is a persecution of a political opponent. This was never supposed to happen in America.
Obviously, there's plenty of publicly available evidence of Trump's protracted attempt to steal the election, but will it be enough to hold him to account legally? I'm joined now by Michael Astrue, former associate counsel to George H.W. Bush and Ronald Reagan, and former commissioner of Social Security for George W. Bush and Barack Obama. Michael, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
As you size it up, how strong is this case against Donald Trump?
Well, I think the key thing is we don't really know at this point, because one of the things that I would expect is that a number of witnesses may come forward to avoid prosecution. And we don't know.
Unindicted co-conspirators?
Well, yeah, and particularly Mr. Eastland, the lawyer, would be critical, but is the White House Chief of Staff going to turn? You know, who else is going to turn? We don't know the answers to those questions yet. So right now it's a little bit difficult to evaluate the full strength of the case. But it's a pretty strong case. I mean, there's a lot of facts to support the allegations. On the other hand, there's trickiness in a lot of it, and I don't think it's a slam dunk. And political corruption cases generally often have unpredictable results.
Jack Smith, the special counsel, is making the argument that former President Trump exploited the January 6th attack on the Capitol, but not that he incited the attack. Yeah. Why do you think Smith is taking that tack?
I think it's because it's the legal definition of incitement, I think. I think there's a suggestion in that term that you started it from the beginning. And I think that a reasonable observer might conclude that what Trump did here was opportunistic, and that this had started and he jumped on it. And if that's true, then incitement might not hold up as a matter of law. Particularly, you have to keep remembering the criminal law standard beyond a reasonable doubt. Yeah. You know, and that does make a difference in a lot of these terms. So I think he went for the exploitation, which is a lower standard and should be easier for him to prove, I would think.
A lot of media outlets have been reporting that in order to succeed, the government will need to prove that Trump knew he lost the election and sought to overturn the results anyway. This is an argument, I should note, that Trump's legal team has been putting out there. Let's take a look at one of his attorneys making this case earlier this week.
And frankly, by bringing this, I don't think Jack Smith really thought it through. There only has to be proof that, number one, President Trump believed that this election was not completely honest. And number two, Jack Smith has opened himself up to a can of worms that we can now look at and really examine.
Mike Astrue, do you think the government has to show that Trump knew he lost the election in order to succeed here?
I don't think you can give a general, I mean, I think that response is ridiculous. I think you have to go through count by count and line the counts of the indictment against the evidence that you need for them. So in some cases, I think they will have to show that. In other cases, I don't think they will have to show that.
I have read a piece recently by Greg Sargent at the Washington Post who identified another argument that Trump's team is floating, that he was simply following good legal advice by experts, given to him by experts like Eastman as he sought to overturn the election, as an especially significant line of defense, counterattack by the Trump legal team. Is that an important argument for them to be floating? And if so, why?
I think so. I mean, they don't have that many great defenses, but this is one that it's logical that they would try. It's one that's fraught with danger. It's been commonly used in other situations, and part of the problem is that the legal advice has to cover foursquare what was done. And it's a little hard to imagine even some of these horrible lawyers that have advised Trump, you know, including Rudy Giuliani, going through and saying, oh yeah, well this will be okay, and this will be okay. To take some general advice that they gave or specific to some particular situation and use that as a blanket excuse for everything that was done strikes me as relatively unlikely to hold up.
When do you think we are likely to get a verdict in this case? As you know, the Trump team is already saying, hey, we need as much time to prepare our defense as the prosecution had to put together their case. When are we going to see a resolution here?
Well, the judge wants to start the trial in December, and she's a determined person, and I think that it's pretty likely that this case will start in December. I think that the Trump defense team will have to go up to the Court of Appeals to get a delay, and I think that will be difficult for them. Not impossible, perhaps, but difficult. So I think the odds are this will start in December. If it does start in December, then I think the appeal track, given the public significance, will move much more quickly than the pretrial. So I think that you could get a decision from if this case is over in December, you could get a decision in the Court of Appeals February, and then you could get to the Supreme Court March, April, something like that. So I think by spring, there's a high likelihood that this case will be over.
You're saying, so you're saying there would actually be a verdict issued, and then there'd be an appellate ruling and a Supreme Court ruling on the merits of the case by next spring?
Yeah, I in fact think that there's a real chance that there'll be a final decision in this case before the Florida case is even resolved at the first level.
Really?
Yeah.
Why is that?
Because it's the timing and I think the attitude of the D.C. Circuit, knowing that these cases are institutionally important, and I think that they will move. I think down in Florida and the Court of Appeals down there, I think that it'll be more leisurely. Also being 3 or 4 months behind in the chute, there won't be quite the same pressure because there will already have been a decision in the D.C. case. And if it's adverse to the president, I think that takes a lot of the pressure off the Florida.
You've got about half a minute left. As someone who's been around government for a long, long time throughout your life, what's it like personally to watch this particular case at this moment unfolding?
Oh, it's like crawling through your parking lot out here on broken glass. I mean, it's really hard. As a matter of fact, it's only when I realized I was going to comment on this occasionally that I started following it more closely, just because I did find it so painful. And I'm finding a lot about politics a lot more painful than I used to.
I'm glad you said that, because that's been my tack, too. It's painful to contemplate this stuff and to think that this is sort of where we're at. And it's been easy to not want to pay attention, but now I think we have to.
Particularly institution, having worked in 2 White Houses, to see how it's broken down is just, it's really painful for me.
Yeah. On that downbeat note, Mike Astrue, thank you for being here. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.